break my own rule. This is a woman who I think if we look into her life and the way God has worked in her life, there is something worthy of emulation. Now, admittedly, I'm just coming from a men's conference, but I don't want to talk about men. I want to talk about women. Because when I read this text, I see something in verse 1. There was a man named Elkanah who had lived in Ramah in the region of Zuph. And it's strange the way the Hebrew writer begins this, because he begins by saying there was a man, but the story is not about a man, it's about a woman. A woman whose commitment to Christ, commitment to God, changed the shape of the nation of Israel. And it's something about this woman that I think is worthy of emulation if we study the text and allow God to speak to us. Will you stay awake just for a few more minutes? Because the text says that Elkanah had 2 wives. And I want to be careful. When you read the Bible, sometimes you read the Bible, and this is not prescriptive. It is simply informative. God is not saying that somehow there's a validation for polygamy. He's saying that in this text, in this context, this is what was occurring. And sometimes we read the Bible and we think that it is offered as a prescription or a way of life. No, the value of it is in recognizing that it's not a prescription, it is information. It is not prescriptive, it is informative. And it shows us some things that we could appreciate in this text and connect to baby mama drama even today. Because you can look at this and read and sense, you know what? One man, one woman is the best way. There's some drama in this text. There's some hurt feelings in this text. There's some people who are in pain in this text. And so it's not this idea that's offered to us that says this is the way it should be. It is offered to us as a descriptive, informative, not prescriptive recognition of, you know what, God's got a better way. And in this text, what we see is this woman who is so committed to this idea of worshiping a God that she knows that it will change the trajectory of her life. See, it's not good to be worshiping a God that you don't know anything about. It's not that that's not possible, but the reality is you can't really appreciate God for who he is until you know who he is. There's a reason why she is worshiping God, who is the Lord of heaven's armies. King James would say the Lord of heaven's hosts, because she recognized something about God in terms of his power, in terms of his strength, in terms of his ability to work up and do out of resources that belong to him. When you read the text and sometimes hear the offering of the Lord of heaven's hosts, it is God's describing how he takes angels and armies and men and resources and marshal them together for the good of his people. And this woman was saying, no, I know something about God that tells me I can go to him with my need, because what I know about him is that he's got the resources and the power to fix what is broken, to heal what is sick, and to aid and assist me where I need it most. And so she goes to a God that she knows and understands. And here's what I would offer to you this morning. You can't know that he's good if you ain't never been bad. You can't know that he is a healer if you've never been sick. You don't know that he's a deliverer if you've never been bound. And there are some things that once you discover them about God, nobody else has to tell you about. You can say like grandmama, you can't make me doubt him. I know too much about him. I know him for myself. There are things about God that you only discover in the experience called life. That's why the writer says, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. He's not saying taste like an apple. He's not saying taste like the kind of clothes you wear. He's saying you got to experience God. And when you experience God, then you'll know how good God is. But if you've never tasted of God, you don't know what he can do. And a lot of people know about God, but they don't know God. And I've made a decision, you know what? There's some things I know about God. While you may want to debate the reality of the hagios pneumos and whether or not the Spirit exists, something on the inside that holds the reins, something within that banishes pain. I can't exegete it, but I know because I've experienced him for myself. Hannah say, no, wait a minute. Hannah say, I know something about him. I know that he's the Lord of heaven's hosts. I know he is the Lord of the armies of glory. And I know something about this God in the life that I now live that causes me to depend upon him. She's worthy of emulation because she understands something about the worship of her God in the midst of her own personal warfare. You say, how is that? Look inside this text, if you would. Look with me inside verse 3. Verse 3 says, each year, Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of heaven's armies at the tabernacle. And then skip on down here to verse 19. It says, the entire family got up early the next morning and went to worship the Lord once more. Then they returned home to Ramah. If you notice, as you keep working through the text, working through this story, there are times in this passage. Look at verse 21. The next year, Elkanah and his family went on to their annual trip to offer a sacrifice to the Lord. Listen, every year, they kept going to do the exact same thing, participate in worship. And here's what I want to submit to you. Every now and then, you've got to recognize that there's a consistency in worship. While God hasn't done what you asked God to do, every year, she's still going with the same issue, the same discouragement, the same heartbreak. But every year, faithfully, what Hannah keeps doing is she keeps going. And she won't stop going to worship. Some people, once they fall on hard times, they quit on God. That's why I get frustrated when I talk to people and they say, well, you know, God took so-and-so and I'm mad at God. And I'm thinking, you ought to be grateful he didn't take you. I mean, I get being upset with God for a minute, but I've heard people say, I'll never step back in a church as long. Well, you know what? You crazy. Because the only way you're going to make it in this life, you got to have a God on your side. If you think you bad enough and big enough to make it all by yourself, holler at me in a couple of years when the enemy has got done whamming you out and you now realize that in and of yourself you can do nothing. Hannah kept coming. Hannah, year after year. Hannah, by the way, I know you've been praying. Has God done anything? Not yet, but I'm still going to worship him. And there's something about Hannah's understanding of worship in that she understands by going. She's made a commitment that the power of God is not limited to military success, which is why once she recognizes that she is with child, she has already vowed to the Lord, not in a sort of deal, but in a way of saying, the gift you give to me, I'm going to give back to you, because she recognizes that God's favor, God's gift is always something that should be given back to God. I have to tell you, a few days ago, I was actually paralyzed when I read the story of young Scott McMillan, this 3-year-old boy in West County Township, who, as a gift that God had given to parents, according to the reports, both local and UPI, it appears that when this 3-year-old was brought into the ER, his body was so broken and so badly damaged that battle-tested ER nurses who see all kinds of horror every day in the emergency room, they began to weep for this 3-year-old boy who was brought in dead. How do you take a 3-year-old, tie him upside down, and beat him while hanging upside down? How do you take the same 3-year-old, stick him in a shower while unconscious for 30 minutes in an attempt to revive him, and then after 30 minutes of being in a shower and yet unrevived, throw him on a mattress so he can sleep and go get pizza? That's not normal. That's demonic. That's somebody who doesn't understand what to do with a gift. And there are people who don't really understand what to do with gifts that God gives. They don't all have to be children. Sometimes what God expects is that when God has blessed you, graced you, and given you a gift of whatever sort, that you take that gift and you learn how to multiply, maximize that gift, and then give it back to God. You see, that's why Hannah's worthy of emulation, because she understands that because the Lord gives to me a gift, I know what to do with that gift. I'm going to nurture it and I'm going to give it right back to God. And since I'm on this point by way of gifts, there are people who occupy churches for years And God has given them all kinds of spiritual gifts. And they die having never used one gift that God has given to them. The minute you've been born again, God does something. He supernaturally gives you a spiritual gift. Our task is to discover what that gift is and to use that gift so that the rest of the body is built up. My gift is my spiritual giftedness does not have to be your spiritual giftedness, because God gives all of us individual gifts, so that God gives gifts to his people who then take those gifts, maximize those gifts, and then use those gifts to grow his body and strengthen his people. Show me a church where it's dead and stale and nobody growing. It's because there's folks sitting on their gifts. And my responsibility is not to do it all, because I know what my gift is: to preach and to teach and to encourage and to build you up and to equip you to do the work. In fact, sheep are supposed to make sheep. Shepherds don't make sheep. Sheep are supposed to make sheep. So if there's a problem with why a church doesn't develop and grow, it's not because the shepherd is no good. It's because the sheep are sitting on their gifts. Preach, Dan Williams. Listen here, sheep make other sheep. I realize we live in a culture where some shepherds thought the word said breed with the sheep. But what he said was feed the sheep. And your responsibility is to multiply the sheep, because only sheep can make sheep. Shepherds don't do that. And when you got a gift, that's what you do. You use your gift to build up the body. So somebody comes in low and messed up, and you say, you know what, pick your head up, because the same God that worked in my life, he can work in your life. The same God that is the Lord of heaven's armies, he stands ready to help you. Come on, we're going to walk through this together, and we're going to rejoice at what God does a year from now. We're going to bless his name together. Every year she comes, and every year she comes to this place of worship. And it's bizarre, because if you hear the text, verse 8 says that, why are you crying, Hannah? Elkanah comes, and Elkanah is a good guy, but he's just ignorant. Because there's some stuff that no man can do for a woman. There's some things that no woman can ever do for a man. And if you're looking for a man to do some things for you that only God can do, Elkanah has missed the point. What he doesn't understand is that, yes, you've been good. This is a Hebrew idiomatic expression. Aren't I better to you than 10 sons? Many Hebrew men would utter that as a kind of idiomatic expression, declaring that I'm doing the best I can. But the reality is that at some point, no matter how good your spouse is, whether they are a man, whether they are a woman, whether it's a husband or wife, no matter how good they are, they can never be God. And there are some needs on the inside, some things that are so broken, so messed up, so void, that only a God can fill them. And while you look for fulfillment in other things, no person can meet the need that God can. And once God comes in, God can do things that nobody else can possibly do. God can give you a grounding. God can give you a strength that you can't get from anywhere else. She comes in to the place of worship. Listen, feeling incomplete, feeling inadequate. And in the place of worship where she should be built up, she's made to feel worse. You see, I think there's a problem when worship and being around the Lord's people makes me feel worse instead of better. I wish I could talk to Hannah, because Hannah keeps coming, and it's hard to understand why. But Hannah's on to something about who can supply her need. And when you come to worship, and instead of feeling better, all you feel is worse, there's a problem with the worship environment. which suggests that there is something that needs to be tweaked. Because the world is filled with people who are feeling inadequate and feeling incomplete. And when they come through the doors of the gathered community, what they should feel is that somehow I know there's a God that can make a way. You know, I'm not advocating less than being truthful, but I'm advocating that at some point when I come, I need to be able to get a word from the Lord that says, you know what, my situation is grave, but God can make it better. I mean, there's a problem when you've gone through a divorce and come to church and still feel like a leper. There's a problem when you've been addicted and come to church and still feel like you're less than human. There's a problem when you come to church and you've messed up, you've blown it, you've failed, and you always go away feeling like you just ain't no good. That ain't God. God reaches down. The Genesis account says that God reached down into the dirt and created man, which tells me that God has always got his hands in the mud. He's always in the dirt. He's always in the down and dirty, pulling stuff up out of it that can be redemptive. That's why if you are in dirt, that's your claim to fame. Where he found me was not high on the hill, but in the low levels of the muck and the mire. And he reached down and he picked me up. And now I'm standing on solid ground. That's a good God. She comes in year after year. And in the place where she should come away with a witness and a real wonder of who God is, she's feeling worse. And the truth is that as you look at this text, her consistency is worthy of emulation because there's something about the mystery of God, the mysterium, the ways in which God works. Remember, the text says that for years she has come in and gone out the exact same way. For years she's come in and gone out, still feeling bad. But then one day, isn't it strange? Isn't this a mystery of God? How just one day can change years. Oh, come on, you're not hearing me. It's the way one day. I mean, look at your own life. If you can remember there was one day when you gave your life to the Lord Jesus Christ. And I'm not suggesting that everything became rosy after that, but every now and then you go back to that one day. That one day when you finally realize, you know what? I ain't in this all by myself. That one day when you realize, you know what? If God be for me, it doesn't matter who's against me. That one day when you realize, you know what? I can put this bottle down. That one day when you realize I can put this drug down. That one day when you discovered I don't need that woman, I don't need that man. That one day when you discovered, you know what? I am strong because of who the Lord is in me. That one day when the blinders fell off and you finally could see. That one day when you recognize he that is with me is greater than he that is. That one day that changed every other thing, that changed your life completely. I'm just looking for a witness. Is there anybody here who can say, yeah, Reverend, I remember one day when the light came on and my heart was healed and I realized, Lord, it's just you and me. Thank you, God, for hearing my prayer. Thank you for lifting me up. Thank you. Just one day. One day. And that one day changes Hannah. That one day changes the way she will go through the rest of her life. She is worthy of emulation because she understands something, having walked through this sort of difficult impasse. Her realization of who God is has been changed in simply one day. And what I want to say to you is sometimes you got to worship while you're still waiting. You say, Williams, where is that in the text? Let me show you something here. Here's what it says inside verse 15. Oh, no, sir, she replied. I haven't been drinking wine or anything stronger, but I am very discouraged, and I was pouring my heart out to the Lord. Before you get to verse 16, let me just remind you that sometimes even the preacher don't get it right. Eli doesn't know what's going on in her life because there's some stuff you can't know from outside observable evidence. His assumption is that she is intoxicated. And the truth is she is discouraged. That's why sometimes you can't ever act as if the preachers are omniscient when God is. Eli doesn't know what God is doing. And the best spiritual leaders don't always try to pretend like they do. It is pride that keeps us from saying, I don't know. Instead of trying to act super saintly and explain everything. Sometimes I don't know what God is doing. And the worst kind of spiritual advisors I know are the ones that always try to explain everything about God. How are you going to explain God? You know the worst problem Job had was 3 advisors trying to explain what God was doing when they were, here we go again, ignorant. They didn't have a clue what God was doing. And it's always problematic to try to explain what God is up to when you don't know. Eli doesn't know what God is up to. But Hannah's engaged in a new encounter with God that is changing what she knows about him. And 16 says, but I am very discouraged and I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I am a wicked woman. I have been praying out of great anguish and sorrow. In that case, Eli said, go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the request you have asked of. And look at how her disposition now changes. Verse 18, oh, thank you, sir, she exclaimed. Then she went back and began to eat again. And she was no longer sad. Now, here's what I want you to understand about this woman and why I admire her so much. When the writer says that Eli pronounces the peace word and she goes, that is because at that moment there is this recognition that, you know what? God is going to do what you've asked him to do. What I like about the text is that Hannah, her position has now changed. Her disposition has now changed. Her attitude is now changed. But her outward circumstances have not. She is still barren. And nothing about her situation has changed yet. And still she has the ability. If you read chapter 2, there's a song that Hannah is singing because of the realization that God is working even though I'm waiting. You don't have to be completely clear about what he's going to do and how. But there was always something on the inside that allows you to celebrate and bear witness to God when you're clear that, you know what? God is at work. And if he ain't working on my situation, he's working on me. And I can rejoice because God is at work. I mean, this is an incredible testimony of this woman who now is about to go out for the first time singing. And you know what? I think it is a shame to come to worship and never actually worship and never be able to go out different from when you came in. Every week there are people by the millions that go into churches one way and they come out the exact same way. But I think there's something worthy of emulation when you can go in and then come out. And even though God hasn't done it yet, you can still be singing, saying, Lord, I thank you. I will bless you anyhow. I haven't seen the result of all that you're going to do, but you know what? I'm going to raise my hands anyway. I'm going to open my mouth anyhow. I'm going to sing the songs of Zion anyway because I realize that can't nobody work like you can work. Do I have a witness anywhere? This woman is worthy of emulation in my mind because she models for us things that I think can help us make it through our own midnights, our own dark impasses. The way this woman sings and rejoices in what God will do. is worthy of emulation because she has a faith rooted and grounded in the Savior who can do anything but fail. And I think that as we begin to amass people whose lives we think worthy of emulation, in addition to the Lord Jesus Christ, we need to be looking at people who are worthy of our regard, our respect, and appreciation for what it is they've done. Not the celebration of celebrity having done nothing, but people who have walked, come through, and then been able to point us all back to him through their life and through their witness. Come on, if you love the Lord, give him praise, give him honor, give him glory.